now at home, the mothers of America are putting this advice to work. Robitussin, recommended by Dr. Mom. Which Robitussin is right for you? Ask your doctor or pharmacist.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Two packed commuter trains traveling in opposite directions rammed one another in a suburb of Sao Paulo, Brazil. At least 58 people were killed and 100 injured. Brazilian police say it could take a week to figure out just what happened. Lebanon's regular army has been ordered into West Beirut to end the factional fighting there.
This is Daybreak on CNN for Wednesday, February 18th. With Reid Collins in Washington and Molly McCoy and Patrick Greenlaw in Atlanta.
Good morning. Lebanon's regular army has been ordered into West Beirut with orders to shoot on sight any militia members who refuse to lay down their arms. The measure was taken at the suggestion of the Syrians, who say they're sending in observers along with those regular armed forces. Three factions have been fighting since Sunday, and the death toll in West Beirut is nearly 50. When word that the army was coming reached the embattled sector, journalists say the fighting tempo increased, as if to get in one last round. Well, the Amal militia was good to its word this morning, and it lifted its siege of the big Borj el-Barajne refugee camp. Both sides say food and medicine now is coming into the camp that houses some 20,000 Palestinians. But a spokesman near the other camp, Shatila, says the siege of the Amal continues there. The Israeli official who's in charge of Lebanese policy says the Israeli army may just enter Lebanon again and pursue a scorched earth policy in the south. Yuri Lubrani said if Lebanese guerrillas disrupt life along Israel's northern borders, then the Israeli army would make it impossible for residents of southern Lebanon to live a normal life. And Lubrani said Israeli troops also might re-enter if the Israeli-backed South Lebanon army does collapse. That force has suffered heavy losses at the hands of guerrillas, is said to be demoralized now. The death toll ranges from 58 to 70 this morning in a train collision in Brazil. Two packed commuter trains traveling in opposite directions sideswiped in the suburbs of Sao Paulo. Heavy rain hampered the rescue effort as workers cut through metal to try to reach the victims. And doctors say some of the 100 injured may not survive. Brazilian officials aren't certain why one train was switched onto the tracks of the other, and they say their investigation could take a week to pinpoint the cause. A much less serious train accident last night in the Bronx, New York. Two slow-moving commuter trains hit one another on a stretch of elevated track. A northbound train that carried 450 commuters struck an empty southbound train heading back into Grand Central Station. Neither train was going any faster than 6 miles an hour. There were 25 minor injuries, most of these bloodied noses. The Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir calls on the president and congressional leaders today as his working visit in Washington continues. Shamir met yesterday with Secretary of State Schultz, and those two disagreed publicly over the possible value of an international Middle East peace conference. Schultz said such a conference ought at least to be considered. Shamir dismissed it as a Soviet-inspired notion supported by radical Arab nations.
I will not deny I am strongly opposed to this invention of an international conference for peace. It will not bring peace to our area. It will not serve the cause of peace.
The two said they touched on the Iran arms deal, but only briefly in their talks. And when Shamir meets President Reagan today, well, the White House says that Iran affair will not be a high priority item.
It's 4 minutes past the hour now. Acting CIA Director Robert Gates will continue testifying before Congress today. He's seeking permanent appointment to his post at the agency. Yesterday, before the Senate Intelligence Committee, he promised to keep a close rapport with Congress. He says he would consider resigning rather than keep from Congress word of such activities as the Iran arms deal. That was kept secret, and Gates did some public breastbeating over the CIA's role.
Let me acknowledge for the record that there were shortcomings in CIA's participation in the Iran project. Our officers violated our own internal regulations in facilitating the flight in November 1985. We should have protested more vigorously our involvement in an operation where there were significant elements unknown to us.
Gates will resume testimony this morning at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. That is 7:30 a.m. on the West Coast, and CNN will cover that hearing live.
The Washington Post today reports that since December, First Lady Nancy Reagan has pushed for the ouster of White House Chief of Staff Ronald Reagan. The paper's unidentified sources say his demise is inevitable. The paper also says that Mrs. Reagan is so angry she won't even speak to Reagan. She blames him for the way the Iran arms deal has blossomed into a public scandal. Reagan's office denies the report. President Reagan says nothing. The man who directed the ill-fated Twilight Zone movie is expected to take the stand in his own defense today. Director John Landis will appear as the first defense witness in the 5.5-month-old trial. Landis' attorney made the surprise announcement yesterday after the trial judge denied motions for acquittal. Prosecutor Leah D'Agostino says calling Landis as a witness is a clear sign that the defense is worried. Landis and 4 others are charged with involuntary manslaughter in connection with the deaths of 3 actors. A helicopter crashed on them during filming of a scene from the Twilight Zone movie.
Felony securities fraud indictments have been handed down against 16 followers of political extremist Lyndon LaRouche. Misdemeanor charges against 5 corporations affiliated with LaRouche remain sealed. Authorities contend the followers of the one-time presidential candidate sold unregistered securities. They also say the LaRouche supporters sold those securities as unregistered agents. A spokeswoman for LaRouche says the charges are an attempt to shut down his political movement. She called the charges a fraud of justice. Supporters of 8 people accused of having ties to the Marxist Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine danced and sang outside a courtroom in Los Angeles yesterday. An immigration judge had freed 5 members of the group on their own recognizance and set bond for the other 3. He ruled they could no longer be held without bail on charges they violated a McCarthy-era law that prohibits immigrants from advocating overthrow of the U.S. government. The 7 Jordanians and a Kenyan had been in jail since January 26th. A deportation hearing will be held in late April.
Old man winter isn't letting up in the south today. Storms continue to take lives, close schools, and knock down power lines. West Virginia is still trying to dig out after 2 days of sleet, snow, and freezing rain. And another 4 inches of snow is in the forecast for today. The storms knocked out power to tens of thousands in West Virginia, the Carolinas, Virginia, and in Kentucky. Thousands of utility customers remain without power. Some dairy farmers in south central Kentucky have been forced to milk their cows the old-fashioned way by hand. But the state helped out yesterday by dispatching guardsmen with generators to rural districts. Probably by hand with gloves, because it's also very, very chilly in the southeastern part of the United States. For the latest on the weather, let's check in with Valerie Voss. Valerie, good morning.
Good morning. We do have chilly conditions and also a little bit of light snow falling all the way from northern Mississippi up across
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Daywatch on CNN for Wednesday, February 18th. With Reid Collins in Washington, Molly McCoy and Patrick Greenlaw in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. Capitol Hill's not through with Robert Gates yet. President Reagan's nominee to head the CIA returns this morning for a second round of Senate confirmation hearings. The Iran-Contra affair was practically the sole topic of discussion yesterday. Gates acknowledged that the CIA had made mistakes, and he promised to allow no similar covert adventures if he runs the agency. But the senators criticized Gates for not bringing the lawmakers evidence he got first last fall of any secret Contra cash transfers. CNN's planning live coverage when the Gates hearings resume at 10:30 Eastern Time this morning, 7:30 Pacific. That's about half an hour from now. Congressional investigators reportedly will get to see the same presidential notes on the Iran arms deal shown to the Tower Commission. Sources tell the Associated Press the White House is willing to allow access to the typewritten excerpts from Mr. Reagan's own personal log. The terms reportedly would be the same offered the Tower panel. That is, investigators could make notes from the transcripts but not copy them and give them right back. The Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir is expected to get some tough questions from Congress today about the Israeli role in the Iran-Contra affair. This issue came up briefly yesterday in the meeting between Shamir and the Secretary of State, George Shultz. Shultz says despite the possible Israeli links, the decisions were made ultimately in Washington and are Washington's responsibility. Shamir meets with President Reagan for lunch, and then it's on to talk with some congressional leaders later in the afternoon. Heavy fighting broke out between Shiite Muslims and Druze militiamen in Beirut again this morning. It shattered a Syrian-sponsored truce just hours after it was supposedly taking effect. More than 40 people have been killed in the fighting in the past couple of days. Regular Lebanese army forces have been ordered into that area with orders to shoot on sight any armed person who does not obey orders. And the Amal Shiite militia says it now has lifted a siege on 3 Palestinian refugee camps. This allows relief organizations to resupply the camp's residents with emergency supplies and food. Many have been reduced to eating cats and rats to stay alive.
7 Palestinian men and a Kenyan woman accused of having links to a Mideast terrorist organization are being released from a Los Angeles jail pending legal proceedings that could result in their deportation. The 8 defendants say they are not terrorists and are being persecuted by immigration officials because of their political beliefs. CNN's Chuck Condor reports on how the Arab American community is responding.
Outside the immigration courtroom, pro-Palestinian demonstrators supported the rights of the 8 detainees, bearing signs that read, "No more Arab scapegoats." Inside a crowded immigration hearing room, government attorneys were calling 32-year-old defendant Hadir Hamidi the Southern California head of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. 6 others.
That's it for now. We'll have another report on what's happening on Wall Street in 1 hour from the CNN Business News Desk in New York.
The original plan for the Senate Intelligence Committee was to spend one day hearing Robert Gates tell them why he should be head of the CIA, as proposed by President Reagan with his nomination of Gates. But after a sometimes tense and day-long session yesterday, senators and Gates are finding themselves getting together again today. Another morning of testimony about to begin. Yesterday, Senator William Cohn, Republican of Maine, told Gates, "Some of your responses are not satisfactory." Congressional sources say House and Senate investigative committees will get the transcripts of President Reagan's personal notes on the Iran-Contra affair. In other news, Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir faces questions about Israel's involvement in the Iranian operation when he meets this afternoon with some congressional leaders. Earlier, Shamir lunches with the president in the White House, where the Washington Post reports today First Lady Nancy Reagan has stopped speaking to the Chief of Staff, Ronald Reagan. The paper claims she has tried to have Mr. Reagan replaced since December. The story quotes a senior official as saying reports of Reagan's imminent departure are just wishful thinking by his critics. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee today begins considering a bill that would provide $300 million in economic aid to Nicaragua's neighbors, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. That same bill would block the remaining $40 million in aid scheduled for the anti-Sandinista rebels, the aid Congress had appropriated at first last year. Admiral William Crowe, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, says the U.S. should keeping the Contras even though they have lots of problems. Well, Crowe told the Senate Armed Services Committee yesterday this prospect of doing something in Central America is good if we can persevere.
Pentagon sources say President Reagan is expected to nominate James Webb Jr. to be Secretary of the Navy. Webb, who announced his retirement last week as an Assistant Secretary of Defense, is a decorated veteran of Vietnam. If nominated and confirmed, he'll replace Navy Secretary John Lehman, whose own resignation was accepted yesterday by the President.
I think this is a very timely juncture after 6 years to turn over the reins to someone else. We have essentially put into place the 600-ship Navy and restored the readiness of the fleet and the training and the morale and the personnel, the spare parts. And the Navy is in very good shape. The Marine Corps is in very good shape. And so it's, I think, time to move on.
Lehman said he would remain in his Pentagon post until his successor is named and confirmed by the Senate. Reid?
Molly, speaking of successors and confirmation, this is Robert Gates, the CIA Director Designate, back on Capitol Hill to be questioned some more by the Senate Intelligence Committee. The senators were critical of Gates, or more properly the CIA's role in the original Iranian arms arrangements. He told them that he came across a glimmer of evidence in October that there might be something wrong with the money's direction, that it might be flowing someplace, but said he didn't really know enough, it wasn't strong enough evidence to recommend that his then boss, the CIA Director William Casey, get up to the Hill and tell the congressman about it. Mr. Gates said yesterday, of course, that he would do his best to reconstruct the relationship between that federal agency and the federal watchdogs on Capitol Hill. There's no telling exactly how long today's hearing may continue. It's possible that there will be a closed-door session, perhaps to go over something a little more sensitive on this underside of the laundry list. But there's no way of telling exactly how the committee vote may break down. It was thought these would be quick hearings, a one-day session yesterday, then a wait for the Tower Commission's report to come out on its examination of the NSC dealings relative to the Iranian-Contra arrangements. Then finally the vote. And pretty soon we should be hearing from the senators and from the designated director of the CIA. Right now, the Day Watch will continue.
That it's important to have open hearings such as these, which do affirm that even in those areas of activity, we must operate.
And so the Democratic chairman and the Republican vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee are winding up this session with the man who's been nominated to become the successor to the ailing William Casey, Robert Gates, whose confirmation hearings continue even as the president and his guest, the Prime Minister of Israel, emerge from the south portico of the White House to read some statements on their lunch.
See with all this unaccustomed sunlight. It's been a pleasure to have an old friend, Prime Minister Shamir of Israel, back to the White House. His visit symbolizes the close and special relations between our countries. His visit has provided an opportunity for in-depth discussion, and I'm pleased to report our discussions went well. High on our agenda, of course, was Middle Eastern peace and our search for a constructive approach to Arab-Israeli reconciliation. We talked about the dangers that threaten Israel and its neighbors and efforts being made to bring a degree of stability to that troubled region. Measurable progress, we both agree, is vital. Peace cannot be built in an environment where there is no hope. In our discussions, we agreed again that the road to peace lies through bilateral negotiations between Israel and its neighbors, including representative Palestinians. We reviewed the diplomatic discussions over the last 2 years, which we've conducted with Jordan, Egypt, and Israel, all of whom share a strong desire to end the conflict that has plagued the Middle East. Our goal now is setting in motion a process accepted by Israel and its neighbors which can lead to a comprehensive peace settlement. We believe this requires direct bilateral negotiations. Any reasonable means of including an international conference should be considered, but the United States remains ready to be an active partner in any serious peace effort. Prime Minister Shamir and I discussed Iran. I underscored our opposition to Iran's use of force, terrorism, and expansionism. In discussing Iran and other regional issues, the Prime Minister and I agreed on the importance of looking to the future instead of dwelling on the past. We also went over our country's strong and vital bilateral relationship and the broad scope of our cooperation. Both our governments face tight budgets. I assured Prime Minister Shamir that we will continue our steadfast support for Israel's own efforts to ensure its security and economic well-being. In that regard, we have designated Israel with other countries a major non-NATO ally for purposes of cooperation in certain aspects of military research and development. Finally, in our discussions, we reaffirmed our concern about the plight of Soviet Jewry. We took note of recent releases but are waiting to see the gates truly opened for Jewish emigration. The United States and Israel share many common values and traditions. We have developed a warm friendship that encompasses close mutual and strategic cooperation. This relationship, in which each gives special consideration to the other's interests, strengthens us both. It's unshakable, and we're proud of it. As we look to the future, the Prime Minister and I are committed to the close cooperation long enjoyed by the United States and Israel. It is an honor to have Prime Minister Shamir with us to reaffirm the solid bond of affection between our countries and our peoples.
Thank you. Mr. President, it is with profound satisfaction that I stand here today as we give expression to the abiding and deep friendship between our two countries. Mr. President, America, under your leadership, stands tall and upright despite transient difficulties. You continue to discharge your great responsibility as the leader of the free world. Without strong United States leadership, mankind could be exposed to very grave peril in the hands of the forces of evil and totalitarianism. Our two countries share values, perceptions, and goals that unite us in thought and in deed. Since my last visit as Prime Minister, we have given more substance to agreements we reached then in regard to strategic cooperation and the free trade area. Now your administration has moved one more step forward by giving a new dimension to our relations. I refer to your decision to accord Israel the status of a major non-NATO ally. We have been among the first to join your strategic defense initiative, and we hope to expand our cooperation in this program. We have also just concluded an agreement enabling the establishment of a relay station for the Voice of America in Israel. Both projects are a reflection of our continuing support of America's defense and advancement of freedom. In our talks today, we explore the prospects of advancing the peace process in the Middle East. While this is not an easy task, it is a noble goal to which we are committed. On the foundations of the Camp David Accords, which remain the only agreed and therefore only viable cornerstone for peace in the area, we renew the call to our neighbors to join us in direct negotiations for the attainment of peace between us. Egypt, our partner to the Camp David Agreement, could play a significant role by encouraging our other neighbors to follow our example and enter into face-to-face talks with us without preconditions. Mr. President, the struggle for the freedom and repatriation of Soviet Jewry is by no means over. We must press on with all vigor to persuade the Soviet authorities to let all our people return to their ancient homeland, the land of Israel. I take this opportunity of expressing our gratitude to you, Mr. President, for the great effort you made for the humanitarian cause of our brothers and sisters in the Soviet Union. Their happiness at coming home to Israel, at experiencing freedom and democracy, is their and our tribute to you. Mr. President, this year, 1987, recalls two events of great significance in the life of our two nations. You will celebrate the bicentennial of the United States Constitution, which is regarded as a model for true civil liberties and democratic government. We are marking the 90th anniversary of the birth of our national liberation movement, Zionism, which restored us to our ancient land and renewed our national independence. Both events have enriched the quality of our lives, and they are at the root of our present relationship, joint efforts, our dreams, and our confidence in the future. Thank you, Mr. President.
So the Prime Minister has a few parting words with Secretary of State Schultz as he gets ready to come up to the Hill and talk to some members of the Congress. As we heard the President say, they did review a little bit the Iranian situation, agree that they oppose the use of Iranian force, but the President said we're looking to the future and not dwelling on the past with special regard to Iran and the Israeli connection at the outset with the Iranian arms shipments, which were the subject, as we heard, if you've been with us on CNN, very much of the morning in the Dirksen office, room 106, where Robert Gates is pressing his case to become the next director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The discussion far up the hill was very similar to the discussions that were held in the White House today relative to the Iranian relationship and what happened in the past and what happens in the future. Gates assuring his Senate confirmers that if he had it to do, he wouldn't do it in the future, as the Iranian arms initiative was held so secretly in the past. And another man who's much in the news today, the White House Chief of Staff, Ronald Reagan, points to the press as he re-enters the White House. So we've seen a great deal of small page history being made on the Hill and at the House today. And Ralph Brunge will have some news right after this.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Now a full 60 minutes of foreign news and perspective. This is the CNN International Hour.
Some help is getting into the refugee camps in Lebanon, but heavy fighting in Beirut is blocking food convoys.
And on Capitol Hill, the second day of hearings for Robert Gates, the president's nominee to head the CIA. Hello, I'm Ralph Winge.
And I'm Donna Kelly.
I'm Bernard Shaw in Washington. Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir has finished his 2-hour meeting with President Reagan. After that session, the president said he will support any initiative to bring peace to the Middle East, including backing an international peace conference that Israel opposes.
Our goal now is setting in motion a process accepted by Israel and its neighbors which can lead to a comprehensive peace settlement. We believe this requires direct bilateral negotiations. Any reasonable means of including an international conference should be considered, but the United States remains ready to be an active partner in any serious peace effort.
Shamir opposes such a peace summit because Moscow would be involved. Shamir says the Camp David Peace Accord is the right path to follow.
On the foundations of the Camp David Accords, which remain the only agreed and therefore only viable cornerstone for peace in the area, we renew the call to our neighbors to join us in direct negotiations for the attainment of peace between us.
Before their Oval Office meeting actually got underway, during a photo session for reporters, Mr. Reagan tried to diffuse reports that he wants his Chief of Staff, Ronald Reagan, off of his team.
Well, this is up to him. I have always said that the people that I've asked to come into government feel that they have to return to private life. That's their business, and I will never try to touch them.
There were more sharp questions today for the man President Reagan wants to head the Central Intelligence Agency. Members of the Senate Intelligence Committee wanted to know why Robert Gates did not do more when he learned the first inklings that Iran arms money may have been going to contra rebels. Gates denied charges that he was passing the buck. Meanwhile, Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania continued to press Gates on the question of when Congress should be informed of secret intelligence activities.
There was no agency operational involvement that would have required a finding in the view of our attorneys, and the decision was made on the basis of information available to those at the time.
Well, that's an interesting answer, but to a different question. Let me repeat my question.
Well, there is no other case that I'm aware of, Senator, where there was illegal intelligence
shouldn't the Intelligence Committee have been informed that a covert operation was undertaken without a finding?
What activity are you referring to?
Are you aware of the fact that there was a flurry and intensive activity involving your general counsel, Stanley Sporkin, to have a finding and to have the finding predated or to apply to matters which had already occurred?
Today's session concluded the committee's public hearings. If there is another hearing, it will be in secret session. The committee is not expected to take any action on the Gates nomination for 2 weeks.
Palestinians at the Burj Barajne refugee camp in Beirut were allowed to buy food today. The Shiite Amal militia lifted its blockade of the camp under orders from its leader, Nabi Berri. The camp has been under attack for 4 months now. Refugees were allowed to go on a shopping trip today to stock up on supplies. Amal guards inspected their loads before letting them return. Berri had promised to lift the siege of another camp, the Shatila camp, but a Palestinian spokesman says the camp is still sealed off.
The United Nations tried to truck supplies into the camps today, but heavy fighting stopped the convoy. Different groups are fighting for control of Beirut's Muslim sector. On one side, the Shiite Amal militia. On the other, a leftist coalition whose key players are the Druze militia and Lebanon's Communist Party. Today, Druze militiamen gained the upper hand. They took control of the Commodore Hotel. The Commodore Hotel, the unofficial headquarters for Western journalists, back when Westerners felt safe in Beirut. Police say at least 25 fighters were killed and 80 wounded around the hotel and the American University of Beirut. This is some of the fiercest fighting Beirut has seen in years.
Now, all this fighting has halted efforts to find Terry Waite. The Anglican envoy disappeared nearly a month ago while trying to negotiate freedom for the foreign hostages in Lebanon. With Beirut once again a battlefield, it's no time to look for any of the missing foreigners. CNN's John Donovan reports.
Mohammed Mehdi, an American visiting Beirut who the U.S. government would rather see out of Lebanon, reports no progress in his personal campaign to free kidnapped Americans. Gunfire kept him confined to his hotel, and earlier in the week it trapped him in the basement of another building. Mehdi, who heads the National Council of Islamic Affairs in New York and came to Beirut on Saturday, says he had a phone call Wednesday from the American ambassador to Lebanon, John Kelly. According to Mehdi, Kelly said he should get out of Lebanon. Mehdi's reply, "We're staying." Here in London, there was no bravado in a televised statement by the Archbishop of Canterbury, the man who 4 weeks ago sent Terry Waite to Beirut, where he disappeared.
Terry Waite is my envoy. He is not responsible to any government agency whatsoever.
That may be the Archbishop's effort to convince the people detaining Waite that there are no grounds for holding him. But with Beirut as it's been this week, a message as subtle as that one could very well go unheard. John Donovan, CNN, London.
Iraq has proclaimed a 2-week halt to its air raids on cities in Iran, but that announcement follows new attacks on at least 3 Iranian towns, including Tabriz. Iraq says it will halt attacks on civilian targets starting at midday tomorrow, but it says the attacks will resume if Iran does not reciprocate. Iraq's announcement follows weeks of cross-border attacks by both sides in the Gulf War. Iraq said it acted at the urging of the opposition inside Iran.
A private research group says that if a decision is made immediately to deploy the Star Wars missile defense system, the system could be in place by 1992. And the George C. Marshall Institute says Star Wars could be at full strength by 1994. The administration has conceded that if it moved for immediate deployment of Star Wars, the 1972 ABM treaty would have to be renegotiated. However, the Reagan administration says no deployment decision will be made this year or next. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee today voted to